Hi everyone, I am Dr. Tolu Olariwaju, or you can call me Tolu for short. And this video will be on how to conduct academic research. Okay, so this will be very useful to you if you are, say, an undergraduate student, a master's student, or PhD student and needs to conduct research, or if you just want to go ahead and conduct academic research in general. This will be a very good video for you. So let's go. Okay, I think we need to start by asking ourselves, why do we conduct academic research? And the purpose of academic research is to seek the truth and new knowledge which enhances social development. Okay, so we want to know the truth about something. You've heard a lot of stuff about it, people have spoken about it, you might have even read some things about it, but we want to actually seek the truth, or we want to get new knowledge. All right, so we're trying to find out something new, something that hasn't been found out before. And normally we try to do this to enhance social development. So for us as a species, or as an entity, human beings, man, male, female, um, you know, if you want to be very precise with, man and woman, but when I say man, generally I mean male, female. Um, so that's the purpose. Also, academic research helps students in their personal growth as well, because research helps in the development of skills, particularly analytical and organizational skills. So, as a student, if you're used to sitting in a classroom and the teacher, the lecturer, the professor, the tutor has been telling you stuff, maybe teaching you stuff, maybe from a textbook or stuff that they've done, research that they've participated in, or things that they've read, journal articles that they've read, and things like that. Um, but then you want to go beyond that now, you want to actually do your own research, and this will be very useful for you when you graduate and you're no longer in an academic setting. You now need to do some research yourself, or it could be a part of your say course requirements. You need to do a piece of dissertation, you need to hand in a thesis, you need to do some research. um, a lot of times you will need to do that, but basically what you're trying to do is to help you with your analytical and organizational skills, so that you yourself can go out to seek the truth and get new knowledge, when you have to. Sometimes it might be within the confines of a university, making use of their resources, but even outside, maybe making use of archives and things like that. As for businesses, research helps businesses understand the needs and demands of society. So it helps them to see and predict ongoing trends and to act accordingly. So, say, the tastes of customers are changing, or maybe there's certain things people want now. Society's changing demographically, ideas, relationships, the way people relate with our company and our product. Maybe, certain things are coming up. Even our competition is coming up with some new things, some new strategy, and we want to understand it and act accordingly. Sometimes we want to be proactive in doing this. So research can help us with that. Academic research can help, and research in general can help as well. So what do we need to conduct academic research? This is a very interesting question as well. To conduct research, you need time, right? You need time to actually get the work done, get your thoughts together, get your research question, sort out your methodology and things like that. We'll talk about that as we go along. But you do need time. You need data, or at least access to data, that you will use in conducting that research. You will need a library, or access to a library, or relevant literature. Nowadays, with the rise of the internet, so many ways we can get this uh, relevant literature from. Google Scholar, you can even just Google some of it. There's ResearchGate, there are all these repositories where you can get access to data, to information, to literature that we couldn't get before. Think about all these data surveys that are available, the World Bank data surveys, the maybe Office of National Statistics of your country, or National Bureau of Statistics, depending on where you are, whatever country you're in that actually has data repository. Of course, I'm talking from a business standpoint now, but there are other research repositories as well. Or data repositories. Maybe if you're in the sciences, you're in the humanities, you're in the arts. In all these domains, right? So you need access to that data. You need access to library or relevant literature where people have published, people have talked, written books, written journal articles about stuff that you're interested in. Okay. So normally, if you're in a university, for instance, your university might have a subscription to databases, or you can go online, maybe the World Bank survey, the Office of National Statistics, or maybe you can download data from, say some database, and then you have the library where you can just go and read stuff. You might also need money. In some instances, you have to actually go out there and get the data yourself, so you might have to travel. You might actually have to design some data collection methods. Nowadays, with the rise of the internet, you need less of this. You could maybe do some videos online, do some interviews online. Get that data. You might not need to travel, but you will need subsistence. You will also need, just things to get it going. There's survey platforms now like Qualtrics and Survey Monkey and all of them that you might also use to get the data without expending as much money as we used to do previously. So all of these will help. Okay, now in order to continue, we need to look at the research paradigm dimension. Okay, so when we talk about the research paradigm, we usually start off with this when we're about to do some research. We'll talk about the research question, which is absolutely key and crucial. But if we just have this at the back of our mind, it will help us with our research question. So a paradigm is an interpretative framework which is guided by a set of beliefs and feelings about the world and how it should be studied. Okay, so what do we believe about the world? What do we feel about the world? How should the world be understood? How should it be studied? Okay, so that is a research paradigm. It's an interpretative framework which is guided by a set of beliefs and feelings about the world and how it should be understood and studied. And there are three main categories of those beliefs. Some will call them the OGs. So we have the ontology, the epistemology, and the methodology. Yeah, you got my man Meth in there, right? Meth, yeah. From the Wu-Tang Clan. Yeah, Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing with. So those are the OGs, right? You have the ontology, the epistemology, and the methodology. So let's go into these in detail. We'll start with ontology. So ontology really is your philosophical assumption about the nature of reality. So, what is real? What do we assume about reality? So, our philosophical assumptions about the nature of reality to do with our assumptions about how the world is made up and the nature of things. So, ontology deals with the question of what is real. Ontology helps researchers recognize how certain they can be about the nature and existence of objects they are researching. It also helps to find out what kind of being or is the human being. So helps to find out what kind of being are we, because we're talking about reality, right? And we'll talk. I'll give some examples later in a later slide. But what is real? Are your thoughts real? Do we need are the only things real the things we can see? So what is real? And things like that. Um, and then we go into epistemology. So epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of knowledge and the process by which knowledge is acquired and validated. It is to do with our beliefs about how one might discover knowledge about the world. It answers the question, how do we know? Or what is the relationship between the inquirer and the known? It is a general set of assumptions about ways of inquiring into the nature of the world. So how do we know? How do we know this thing? Like, how do we know? And, normally when you're asking yourself those questions, then you would have to know who's asking and what is it that we know. We'll talk about this as we go ahead. And then finally we talk about methodology, right? So it's a strategy, plan, or design linking the choice of methods to the desired outcomes. It answers the question, how can we find out? So now, in this particular research, how are we going to find out? So it's a combination of techniques used to inquire into a specific situation. Now, just to tell us about the three orgies. Now, I talked about ontology, which is what is real, okay? Or some would say, what can we know, okay? Um, and you have a continuum there. You have a continuum. You have realism, and we have relativism. So realism, really, in the arts, or in the sciences, we reject imaginations in favor of close observation of outward experiences. So when you're talking about realism, it's something that we can actually see, we can touch, we can feel, stuff that we can all verify, if that's what you want to call it. So that's you know that's what is real. So what is real? It's stuff that we can actually feel. Or you have relativism, which is a sort of milder. Realism, you probably use that in the sciences. You probably use that if you're in maybe, I don't know, biological sciences. In the sciences itself. I'm an economist. I'm in the management sciences. We like to use realism, stuff we can observe as well. Numbers, things like that. We'll talk about that when we get to methodology as well. But when you go to relativism, it has to do that. It has to do with the fact that everything is relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed or observed. So it's all relative. It's what is real is relative to something else. So for instance, you could say, oh, Tolu is real. So I'm real, right? You can touch me, you can feel me. But my realness is relative to something else. So that's relativism, right? So relative to your perspective. And you can ask, for instance, somebody can say, oh, 1,000 pounds. So that's real, right? Somebody can say, oh, 1,000 pounds is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Somebody else could say, well, that's relative, 1,000 pounds, so you can see it's relative, to who you're asking the question. And then when we get to the epistemology, which is how can we know? Well, we can know there are a bunch of points. You can have about 4 5, you can even have different mixes of them, but we'll stick to the two extremes, which is positivism. So we need things that we can scientifically verify, maybe with logical or mathematical proof. So we reject anything, maybe theism, or we reject religion or things like that, or feelings, and things like that. So that's positivism. Really, human knowledge is produced by scientific interpretation. So we need scientific interpretation to be able to verify that. And you can see it's more in the spectrum of realism. You can see how they all stick to that left hand side. Well, with interpretivism, so then we can start going into things like, we can interpret stuff. So really, what you're saying in this case is, let me try and make it interesting. So we can understand the meanings that human beings give to their actions. So positivism, that is what was observed. But why, what meaning do you give to that, as opposed to what has just been observed. It lends itself a lot to do with gray areas in society, like why do you feel this certain way. So it's not a scientifically um, observed phenomenon, something that somebody is has internalized, and they are interpreting, they're giving meaning. So when you have to give meaning to things, we usually go with interpretivism. And then finally, well, before I move from epistemology, I should say that they're in betweens. It's stuff like constructivism, where you construct your reality, things like that, and things. But I'm just sticking to these two for now. And then finally, we have methodology. How can we find out? So we have quantitative methodology, which has to do with numbers, and things like that. And qualitative methodology has to do with other things, feelings, emotions. And you can see how all these uh, at the opposite ends of the spectrum. So you can see how realism, positivism, and quantitative methodology fit nicely on the left-hand side here of the ontology, epistemology, and methodology section. And you can see how relativism, interpretivism, and qualitative is research methods, how they are on the other spectrum. You can see how they fit nicely. With methodology as well, you can have things in between. You can have mixed methods, strangulation, and things like that. Okay, so now we know about research as a continuum. All right, now we are going to focus on our methodology, because that's the thing that will, count the most when you're doing research. You probably have to take a stance at some point. You'd have talked about the philosophy if you have to. Some universities, some schools, some research, don't really, care too much for that. You might need to, but what you actually have to determine is whether you're going to do it via quantitative or qualitative methodology. So let's look at quantitative and qualitative methodology. Now, quantitative data is information about quantities. So that is information that can be measured and written down with numbers. So quantitative numbers, right? Some examples of quantitative data are your height, your shoe size, and the length of your fingernails. You can measure this, right? Your height, inches, centimeters, meters, shoe size, you can have a maybe size 10, whatever, size 11, 8. So there's a number. And length of fingernails, once again, you can measure it in terms of inches or whatever, centimeters, meters. um, so quantitative has to do with numbers, right? We know that. Qualitative data is a bit tricky because it's about qualities. Now, I said qualitative. I don't want to use the word qualities to define that, but what we're talking about is information that can't actually be measured with numbers. Now, sometimes you can actually code that information. So let me give you an example. Some examples of qualitative data are the softness of your skin. You can't exactly use numbers to do it. The grace with which you run, the color of your eyes. However, try telling Photoshop you can't measure color with numbers, right? So if you look at that, what are we actually trying to say? So if you um, say, for instance, let's start with softness of your skin. It could be that you say, actually, okay, I'm going to have different gradients of softness. So the softest is going to be 10, and the least soft, the hardest, is going to be 1. So then you can actually put numbers to it, right? But this is where relativism and everything comes into it, because my 10, so my softest might, might it might mean something else for somebody else. Or maybe let's take my number 5, for instance. My number 5, somebody feels that 5, and they, so that's why you might have to do things like, we'll come to the reliability and things like that later. But you need to make sure those things are consistent, right? Some things, the grace with which you run, think about all this, dances in the Olympics, where you have to be very graceful, right? Of ice, whatever. Color of your eyes, and that's Photoshop does this. You can put a number for a particular color. You can even code certain things. Let's say if you're doing research and you have differences between male female, you could make it such that you maybe male you give them the code of 1, female you give the code of 2, or whatever, so you have these things. So what are the typical features of qualitative and quantitative methods, right? So we know what the data is. First of all, we know that qualitative data is not exactly numerical, quantitative is numerical. So the concepts that we usually deal with qualitative research are things like experience, meaning, understanding, intersubjectivity, so between subjects, reflexivity, so how things change, um, you know, so meaning, experience. So somebody's trying to tell you about their experience, their meaning, how they understand stuff. You probably use qualitative research for that. For quantitative research, when you're trying to do things like prediction, accurate prediction, so if I put one more gallon of water into this tank, what will happen? Oh, if you give people 10 more pounds on average, what would they do? What's the probability of something happening, right? Probability, so 0 to 1, or 0% to 100%. The reliability, how sure are we about this thing? We want to be able to replicate it, or can we operationalize this variable? So A times B, what would it give us, and how can we use that going forward? So the design for qualitative research, because it's uh, flexible, because it's experience based on meaning, you find that the design itself is flexible, it evolves. It's not prescriptive, it's very open, right? So, if you try to maybe you do case study research, and you're asking different case people in the different cases certain things, you might get certain things, and then because of that, the research would have to go a certain way. So it's not prescriptive, it's very open, it evolves, it's flexible. But for quantitative research, it's more controlled, formal, and predetermined. There's only so many ways you can handle numbers. If you give me a quantitative piece of work, I want to see your mean, your median, your mode, your descriptive statistics. Then you have to have a statistical method or an analytical method to actually answer the question that you're trying to answer, right? So, the way I would do it in Australia would be the same way we would do it in the UK, same way we'll do it in the USA, same way we'll do it in Mars, we'll do it in, Saturn. One will always be one, two will always be two. It's prescribed, it's formal. Two will not come and say, oh, you know what, I don't feel like being two today. One won't come and say, you know what, one is lonely and things like that. So it's very formal, it's predetermined, controlled. So you have to learn those methods and you have to be able to use them. Well, qualitative, you still have to learn them, but it's flexible. Now, for sample size, for qualitative research, you can have small sample sizes. You can have a purposive selection, theoretical sampling. So small samples, say maybe you only need to talk to certain people. The phenomena is affecting, maybe top CEOs of, or maybe people who are suffering from a certain disease or something. So you just want to ask them about the experiences, so, or maybe based on the theory, you get people who maybe the theory should be referring to. With quantitative research, we like to have a representative sample, so a sample that is representative of what we're trying to do. It's a bit different from small, it's a bit different from purposive selection. What we're trying to do is we might even want to compare. We might have to have a control group where we compare this to the other, so that we're not just biased. Biases, you're just observing what you think should occur. The sample size is usually large. So if I'm doing a survey, I might want to get a large sample so that I can, be sure that it's representative of the whole population. Sample is just, some parts, some sex, some section of the population. The population is the whole thing. So I'll try to get a large sample as possible. You can also do what we call random selection, where you randomly get some um, observations that relate to the phenomena. In terms of the methods itself, of qualitative research, you have things like participant observation, where you observe what's going on, but you're a participant in the research, or in the group as well. You have semi-structured and unstructured interviews, and you can talk more about this with maybe your supervisors or read up about this, semi-structured interviews. You sort of have a set of questions, and then you go and ask them, and then the research can go a particular direction. Or unstructured, you just go in there, and let the Holy Spirit take control, basically. What happens. You try to ask maybe some general question, maybe to start off with, and then you just keep it going from there. Focus groups, where you have maybe some groups of participants who the phenomena relates to, and then you ask them questions as a group. You can look at diaries. For instance, if I want to know what Shakespeare was thinking when he wrote Romeo and Juliet, for instance, I can go read his diary, things like that. It would make no sense counting how many calories he had that day or something. Look at documents, documents about the phenomena, maybe even news documents, or bulletins, things about the phenomena. um, Quantitative research, you might have to do experiments, especially if you're in the sciences. You might have to conduct surveys. So once again, survey software could help with this. SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, and other ways of collecting data, maybe in an Excel form and things like that. You might have to design your own questionnaire, design your own survey, give it to people. They answer your questions, and then you code it. Maybe you say, okay, do you agree, on a scale of 1 to 5? 5 meaning I really agree, 1 being I disagree, or something, or 0. And you can conduct those surveys, get quantitative data. You can have structured observation as well, observe, and then write the response, in terms of maybe 1, 2, 3, or whatever the outcome is. You can interview as well, and when you interview, this time you convert the answers, the responses, to numbers. So you can do that. Now, the strength of qualitative research is very detailed, is in depth, because people are telling you stuff, as opposed to you observing, right? So it's participant led, it's very meaningful, there's high ecological validity, which refers to the extent to which the findings of a research study are able to be generalized to the real life setting. So someone's told you exactly what's happened, right? So it's very good for that. Quantitative research, because it's standardized, you can usually compare. You're not saying this is how this person felt. That it's very standardized. It's fast if you have the right software, if you have the right computer. You can do things quickly. You need to get the data, but you could probably run your regression. The researcher has more control with that. There's also the possibility of larger sample sizes in quantitative research than you have in qualitative research, and it's good for things like comparison, scientific methods. Mostly, you want to do a quantitative research. The limitations of qualitative research is it might be difficult to extrapolate to population. So because it is very high ecological validity, where it is, what one person's feeling in one instance would not be what he's feeling, or in the other instance, or what she's feeling in another place. So you might find difficulty extrapolating to populations. Sometimes the data is very complex and wildly. Some people are giving you numbers, some people are giving you figures, some people are telling you this, other people are telling you that. It's time consuming as well. With quantitative research, it has very low ecological validity sometimes, okay, because you might find things that you might not actually be able to use in real life. It's possible. For instance, you get the average income or something is minus something, or normally it doesn't happen too often, but it's possible. And participants are constrained. They're constrained with the experiment, or the questions, or how you have planned out the research. So what you need to do, um, as a researcher, what you need to do, everyone, is you need to start off with the right research question. So what do you want to know, right? That will determine if you're going to have a quantitative or qualitative piece of work, okay? How is your research method going to be? Qualitative methods will work for you if you want to know about language, meaning, experience, emotions, relationships, life events, identity, okay? Qualitative methods will work for that. But quantitative research is best when you want to compare data in a systematic way, when you want to make generalizations to the whole population, or test theories with hypothesis. Okay, so if we give people 1 extra pound, how will they react? Okay, we can look at how they've reacted so far when their incomes have been raised. Oh, we want to compare people in London with those in Birmingham, with those in Manchester. We want to see what's going on in Staffordshire. We want to see what's happening in whatever city you're in. You know, so what's going on in Japan? What's going on in Beijing? Want to see what's happening in New York compared to LA. Things like that, Chicago. So you when you want to compare or generalize information extensively within and from a specific population or between different populations, some of them configured within particular geographical or social spatial units like countries, regions, then you want to use quantitative research. So we do that. Now, this is the crux of it, right? So we're getting to the crux of the academic research process. We've talked about the rest of the stuff, but now we get into the crux of it. Well, the first thing you want to do if you're about to conduct academic research is you need to get the topic. So research topic development. Some would say getting the research question. Okay, it's still the same thing. So you want to select a topic, right? So maybe a general topic. Okay, so I'm talking about maybe I want to research cancer. Okay, cancer is a broad field. Okay, so that's a broad field. I want to look at injustices, inequalities. That's a broad field. Then I want to say, okay, actually within this field I want to focus on something. I want to focus on prostate cancer. I want to focus on a liver cancer or whatever. Injustices. I want to focus on racial injustices. I want to focus on gender injustices. Things, or social injustices. So you develop that question. You might want to identify some keywords, maybe injustice, maybe cancer. You want to go find background information. So go to a library, read, see just general stuff. You have some initial literature review, or go on Google Scholar, read something about that stuff. Just have a broad idea. And a way to maybe not waste your time too much, a way to do this, if I have a journal article or something, I'm trying to read a textbook and I'm not actually sure if that's going to be relevant, you might want to start off by get the title, read the abstract, read the introduction, read the methodology, and read the conclusion. That will tell you if you're interested in it or not. Textbooks as well, read the table of content, and things like that. So find out if it's actually relevant. Now, at the end of that process, and it might take some time, a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, at the end of the, or maybe if you're very fast, you could do it in one day, you should have a refined topic. So actually, what I want to study is, does more sugar consumption cause prostate cancer? Or, does exercising reduce the outcome of prostate cancer for a particular, maybe ethnic group, for a particular demographic, for maybe a particular part of the, so or maybe people at a particular age, so maybe men between the ages of, I don't know, 33 to 44 or something, or 55, whatever. So you have that, you refine it, because when you go and read, you find that some people have actually done some research on that thing, or but maybe they didn't look at that particular group, or maybe they only did that in one particular part of the country or something. And then you're finding that actually I could do this, maybe but there has to be something. For instance, I don't it might not be a very strong research if somebody's done it in the USA and you just want to do it in the UK, just because what makes the UK different. So what's different about this context. At the end of it, you should come up with a refined topic. Okay, now, when you've done this, the second step is now to what I like to call a deeper literature review, and you want to select relevant data sources. You want to get a relevant data source. So what am I talking about? At this point, you want to start to say, okay, if I do go and do this research, can I get data to actually answer my research question? So my research question is, I want to study cancer, prostate cancer for men between 33 to 34. Okay, can I get access to those kind of men? What kind of database would I have to get into? Okay, what kind of reading around this topic will I have to do? So you might have to start thinking, okay, can I get access to articles, to books, to databases, to ebooks? Will I have to do an ethnographic study? Okay, so at this point, when you're reading the literature, you start to find out what methodology people have used. Have they used quantitative research methods? Have they used qualitative research methods? Um, have they done an ethnographic study and things like that? Okay, ethnographic studies actually being there and observing what's happened in front of you. Have they gone to do field work? Is there gray literature, things that haven't been published that actually are relevant? You have to do interviews, lab work, news stories. You have to observe certain things, observation, and maybe as a scientist, videos, images, websites, questionnaires. Okay, so you have that. And then when you've gone to that stage, the next thing is you want to determine your methodology based on the relevant data source. So if you have numbers, for instance, automatically you're going to do quantitative research. If you have words, things are not numbers, you're going to have to do qualitative methodology. Okay, so based on the database, is it stuff that has to do with measuring, counting? Is it quantifiable? Can you code it? Or will it be interview transcripts, naturally occurring conversations, documents, media text, things like that? When you've done that, you now have to evaluate and analyze the data. Okay, so if your quantitative data is what you have, then you have to manage that data. You have to get it in, maybe through your Qualtrics, your survey, monkey, whatever it is you've done. You now have to do your descriptive statistics, your mean, median, modes, things like that, and your statistical analysis, depending on what's needed to answer your research question. So you might have to do hypothesis testing or OLS, depending on the type needed to answer your research question. You might have hypothesis, you need statistical analysis for that. OLS, you need. So you can watch videos about that and learn how to do your particular statistical analysis. If it's qualitative data, so that has to do with words, you might have to code the data, index, so in order to get a framework or thematic ideas about the data, you might have to annotate, draw attention to what you consider most important. You might have to label, so pigeonhole or date, so it can be grouped together. You might have to select or choose of interest significant or representative items to illustrate an argument. You might have to do some analysis. So maybe depending on what's needed, thematic analysis based on themes, or grounded theory based on maybe things that clusters you find in the data. So you ground it based on that. So you might have to read more about this qualitative methods, and you have to do your analysis based on that. And then finally, the final step is you have to conclude. Okay, so when you're concluding, you have to interpret the data. So explain what your analysis means for the research. So, we found out that actually exercise helps men between the ages of 33 to 44 to have lower rate of prostate cancer if they do a particular kind of exercise, or if they do this, or if they avoid that diet. Explain what you've seen, summarize based on the data set, and conclude. Make sure you answer the research question, make recommendations, and link this with the previous literature, so what people have done before. Now, this is the crux of our whole conversation here. This right here is almost everything, right? Now, this is your generic format of the academic research. This is what, when your supervisor, whoever's grading your research, or whenever anyone picks up your research is usually in this format. Okay. Now, I've started here with an executive summary, but you usually write that at the end. Okay, sometimes you have an abstract. It's like a mini summary of what you found out in the work. So something like, this research was done to find out the prevalence of prostate cancer in men between the ages of 33 to 44, or this research was done to find out if businesses could benefit from maybe this kind of policy, or if this would be good for the economy, or if this would be good for a particular demographic. And then these were the methods, and this is what we found. Kind of like a mini summary. This is what I found. You usually write that at the end. So normally you start with the introduction. So when you're doing the research itself, so executive summary you do later, you have the introduction. Okay, now in the introduction section, right, so these are all sections, these 8 sections we have here on the board. The executive summary you put at the end. In the introduction section, you want to start with the background to the study. So background to study. So it's been found out that men between they suffer from this. This kind of businesses are suffering. We need to help entrepreneurs to do this. We need to help women to do this. We need to do, this is what's happening. These people, this is what's happening. Then you go into the research problem. Okay, maybe they're suffering because of this. There's more business debts. There's more, normal debts, fatalities or things like that, right? So this is the problem. Then from there you go to the research objective. So what is your research question? And it's very important that you pin this down. So what exactly are you trying to find out? Okay, so I'm trying to find out if this particular thing will help entrepreneurs. I'm trying to find out if this thing will help women to get into businesses or break the glass ceiling. I'm trying to find out if this will help young men and young women to get jobs. I'm trying to find out if this would help with to reduce poverty in the land and things like that. So what is your precise research question? You stated there. And then you move on to your literature review. And this is where you start off with maybe your theoretical framework. So key concepts, definitions, existing theories that are useful. So, entrepreneurship is this, it helps with the economy like this, people create jobs, this, prostate cancer is this manifests itself in this way, things like that. Theories. So, what are the existing theories in the field that are useful to you? Next, you want to go into the the literature review proper. So you need to show that you know what you're talking about. So all the relevant literature in the field. Now, it's hard to say all the relevant literature. You probably will not study all the relevant literature, but you get to a place where you're comfortable that when you read one paper or a textbook or something, they refer to something you've already read. And at that point, you're comfortable. But the aim of all of this is to identify your research gap. So at the end of your literature review, you're like, okay, I've read all this stuff, and you have to cite them and make sure you're not plagiarizing. But at the end of all this stuff that I've read, it's certain that there is a gap. Nobody has researched this particular thing. So there is a gap for me, so I can focus my PhD on that gap. I can do a master's dissertation on that gap. I can do an undergraduate dissertation on that gap. Oh, it will be good for businesses to know about that gap. I want to write a research paper about that gap. So, at the end of the literature review, the gap should be obvious. Then you want to go into your research methodology. So your framework, okay? So your how exactly are you going to do this research, okay? So what's the conceptual design? What's your research philosophical standpoint, right? So we've had a theoretical framework in the literature review, but here again for the methodology, what's the theory that guides how you select the data, how you design your research? Your conceptual design is you might just maybe do a diagrammatic representation, for instance, of how you're going to do the research. Okay, so entrepreneurs, and I think that all these factors are affecting them, maybe income, education, ethnicity, social demographics, and this is the outcome. You can have an arrow showing it. So, things like that. Then you want to state the research design. Is it quantitative or qualitative? At this point, it should be sort of clear, what design your research will follow, based on the theoretical framework, based on your data that you're going to get. And then you might want to state hypothesis if you have any. For instance, you can say, if people get more money, they will make better entrepreneurs, or if they get more education, they make better entrepreneurs. So that's what you're going to test. And now you want to go off and collect the data. Okay, so data collection methods. You need to state it, and then you go off and collect it. Then when you come back, you need to present the data. So we're on step 5 now. Present the data. The presentation slide I showed previously will help with that. So whether that be quantitative or qualitative presentation, you want to evaluate what you've said and you want to analyze it. And then finally, you want to summarize, okay? So summarize the whole data that you've analyzed, that you've evaluated, and answer the research question. Oh, we found that actually if entrepreneurs get more education, their businesses tend to do well. Oh, they're more innovative. Oh, when they get more money, they can buy more machinery, things like that, okay? But then you want to go on ahead and talk about the limitations to the study. So what is it that you found out in this study? But maybe I didn't have data on certain things. Maybe I'm limited by certain methods, things like that. And then finally, you want to conclude. And a lot of times, students don't link this to the previous literature. So okay, this is what I found, and this is how it stands with the body of literature. And then finally, you want to write the reference list at the end. Okay, now as we close, just to say a couple of things, just some hints about the academic process, the academic research process, just some hints. First of all, you want to write Rewrite, organize, and communicate information. So when you write stuff down the first time, go back, read it. Can I write it better? Rewrite it, okay? You might want to organize when you've written the whole thing. How can I organize this academic research work? What's the structure? Does it read properly? Organize the work properly, and make sure you communicate information in a very concise, effective, efficient manner. And you want to be sure of the citation style that you have to use. So, for instance, you might be in a school that says, oh, we have to use the Chicago style, we have to use the APA 6 style, we use the Harvard style. So you find out from your school, your university, or maybe the journal you're submitting to, what's the citation style, and be sure to put the bibliography at the end, just another word for reference list. And you might need a conceptual framework, which is a diagram that shows the process of the research you're undertaking. And you want to be sure of the ETs as well: reliability, validity, and generalizability. I know it's a mouthful, but I'll just talk about them because they'll help as well. So reliability is the extent a measuring procedure yields consistent results on repeated administrations of the scale. So we like the Celsius scale and the Fahrenheit scale because they always tell us when water is boiling and when it freezes, even though the number is different on both of them. So make sure that whatever procedure you're using gets consistent results. And like I said, qualitative, you might have coded something from 0 to 5 or from 1 to 5. And if you use that measuring procedure, will you always get consistent results? So you want to be sure. You might have to tell respondents, okay, this means this and this means that, things like that. And next, validity. So degree a measuring procedure accurately reflects or assesses or captures the specific concept that the researcher is attempting to measure. So you find this a lot of the time. Somebody says, oh, we're going to measure the impact of education on entrepreneurial innovation, for instance. And then they go and measure something else. And they say, oh, actually, so no. So the measuring procedure should accurately reflect or access or capture the specific concept that the researcher is attempting to measure. So, if you're saying you're going to measure something, make sure you are measuring that thing, not something that is sort of like that thing. Then finally, generalizability, the ability to apply the results to other like situations. You find this a lot. People say, oh, I found this thing, but can you replicate it somewhere else? Okay, would that work in another context? So you need to be sure of that as well. And then finally, this thing about triangulation, you might have to use a mixed approach, or you might have to use both qualitative and quantitative methods for something. For instance, if the research problem is, oh, staff are unhappy, and the research question is, oh, why is it the staff are unhappy? You do interviews, qualitative interviews with staff, and they tell you that pay is too low. And then you use quantitative methods, and actually you find out that the pay in the firm is better than the pay in equivalent firms, in other firms. Okay, so you get all their pays, you compare them to pays in other firms, and you find that actually the pay is better. So you might need a mixed method, right? So you can see that no method on its own would have revealed the true answer. So in this case, you needed to have done the qualitative and quantitative. If you would have just come and said, oh, the pay is too low, if you're just based on qualitative research. Quantitative methods, or you would have just saying actually pay is better than equivalent firms, but that doesn't tell you what the problem is. So the only way to do is a mixed approach. So you go back and you interview them again, and they might start to tell you that actually the pay is better than at equivalent firms, but staff still feel unhappy, maybe due to management style or maybe morale or certain things, right? So you might need a mixed method. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, gents, boys and girls, whatever you are, wherever you are, finally, you need to dive in with the right research designs. Okay, so you want to, now we've talked about the philosophy, the paradigm, the OGs, the ETs, and all of that. It's now time for you to go out there, go beyond what has been taken for granted. Think about it. There was a time people thought that the earth was flat. Some people still do. Okay, more power to you if you do. But you need to go beyond what is taken for granted. You need to actually go out there and do your own research, find out the truth, find out that truth, and report that truth. Don't be scared. Don't be scared to challenge the status quo. Everybody believes something, but you go and find something out. You might get laughed at, but that's the truth, right? And you need to approach with openness. Don't go out there with a biased or closed heart, right? approach with openness. Don't go out there with a closed hat. And you need to understand that people are experts of their own experience, especially if you're doing qualitative data. When people tell you things, you have to report what you have found, not what you think you have found. Okay, you need to say the truth. Interpretivism and things like that, you'll get to that later. And you want to have integrity. Okay, this paleontological hoax called Piltdown Man, where some researchers found something and they came to tell us it was something else. You might want to read up on that. It was supposed to be the link between ape and man, but actually it was, they engineered bits of, of a human, and then, something else to make it look like what it wasn't. And he got credit for it, and it's still in many textbooks now. So this is stuff, it's affected us as a scientific community, and it's not good. So just tell the truth. And yeah, that is how to conduct academic research. Thank you, everyone, and all the very best. Bye for now. Bye.